not only is there this continued anti-Semitic threat, terror threat in the UK, but that also, as has been going on for decades, frankly, the Islamic Republic has been very active in terms of trying to target and kind of extend its terror campaign to our own Jewish communities in Britain and across the West.
I don't mind listening to people that I disagree with. I actually think it's great. It's important to stress test your ideas. But I don't see anything of value that has ever come out of Tucker Carlson's mouth, especially in the last few years. This is someone who has no convictions to speak of. He certainly wouldn't send his daughters to live in a country with Sharia law where they could be stoned for perceived infidelity.
Wanting some sort of immigration control is far right. Voting reform is far right. But saying up Hamas, up Hezbollah, essentially, giving succor to anti-Semitic terrorist organisations, that's fine. Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers, and with me in the studio we have Spike's editor Tom Slater.
Hello.
And delighted to have joining us down the line one of our favourite returning guests, Esther Krakue.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for coming back on. Always great to have you on the show. We've got plenty to discuss today. We'll be talking about the ambulance attacks in Golders Green, Tucker Carlson's embrace of Sharia law, and the Together Alliance march against the so-called far right. But before we get into all that, Tom, do you want to remind people about the Spike Summit, our biggest ever event?
Yes, so this is your weekly reminder about the Spike Summit, as Fraser was saying, our biggest ever event that's going to be taking place on Saturday, the 27th of June at the Emmanuel Centre in Westminster. We've already announced some of the speakers, not all of them. Constantine Kissing's going to be there, Toby Young, Alison Pearson, Catherine Burble singing our own Brendan O'Neill, plenty more. Tickets are selling really fast. We're already past the halfway mark, so do get in quickly. Just go to spikes-online.com, click on the ad for the summit and get your tickets. And of course, if you're a Spike supporter, you get a very healthy discount. And if you're not already a Spike supporter, why not sign up to come to the summit? Makes a lot of sense. So yeah, spikes-online.com, click on that summit advert and get your tickets.
Fantastic. So let's talk about the extraordinary attack in Golders Green. 4 Hadsola ambulances, these are ambulances run by the Jewish community in North London, in Golders Green, were attacked, firebombed. 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of arson with intent to harm human life. There's been some rumblings about there being a possible Iranian connection as well. A sort of new terrorist group that's been linked to attacks, anti-Semitic attacks around Europe, has been put in the frame. But Tom, what's your initial reaction to this?
Well, it was sickening, obviously, but this was something that was clearly on the cards. I mean, not only in the UK have we seen a rising number of anti-Semitic attacks, anti-Semitic acts of terrorism. Heaton Park last October, the attempt to gun down Jews in Manchester, which was thankfully foiled, and 2 men brought to justice just a couple of weeks ago, as well as a few arrests that we saw in London of Iranian nationals believed to be surveilling and potentially targeting Jewish communities in London. So it felt like something like this was on the cards. There's a lot that we don't know about this attack in Golders Green, where these 4 ambulances were set alight, other than these 2 arrests and that grainy CCTV footage of 3 kind of black-clad men, head to toe, marching up to those ambulances. But it does seem that not just in terms of this attack, but also a string of attacks we've seen in Belgium, as well as in the Netherlands, which have been claimed by this new Islamist group, which seems to have popped out of nowhere. There's a lot of reporting which would suggest that this is maybe just a sort of banner, a kind of front group almost, which is being used by Tehran to directly commission attacks. This is something that they've done before. It's posing as this group Islamic movement of the Righteous Companions, but as many investigators have pointed out, its logo looks suspiciously like that of Hezbollah and the IRGC, and it doesn't seem to have been on anyone's map until basically a few weeks ago. So it's a reminder that not only is there this continued anti-Semitic threat, terror threat in the UK, but that also, as has been going on for decades, frankly, the Islamic Republic has been very active in terms of trying to target and kind of extend its terror campaign to our own Jewish communities in Britain and across the West. So a really troubling development, but one that is of a piece with a lot of disturbing trends we've seen, not just over the past couple of years, but for many decades now.
Definitely. Esther, I mean, it is quite terrifying. There is this Islamist threat, both that is homegrown, but also now increasingly coming from abroad as well, from Iran. I mean, what have you made of this?
I mean, it's quite unsurprising given the terror profile that the UK, threat profile that the UK faces. I mean, I find it interesting that in the same sort of week that we're hearing about this sort of march against the far right, clearly you couldn't fit the far right into Wembley Stadium. The UK's terror threat overwhelmingly, and I'm talking up to 90%, is made up of Islamists. And this is not me saying it. These are our anti-terror agencies that are saying it. And yet, for some reason, we seem to focus on far right groups' fringes on the internet and throwing buzzwords and names like Andrew Tate and Tommy Robinson, when people are actually losing their lives. And this is becoming a trend. I mean, one of the things that I find most striking is when you speak to Jewish communities in the UK, they're not surprised. And I can't help but feel horrified by that. I mean, a few months ago, 2 Jews were murdered in Manchester just for being Jews. And in the same city, you have, the Green Party stoking sectarian tensions by putting out campaign adverts in a completely different language. And now we've got to the point where a lot of Jewish people are feeling like this is the status quo, and they're actually not even proud to be British anymore because they feel like the British state has turned their back on them. I was in Golders Green not too long ago, and I couldn't believe the amount of increased security presence there, seeing these officers like parading the high street. And I just thought, I've lived near Golders Green for well over a decade. I'm very familiar with that area, and I've never seen something like this before. And I think people really just kind of need to put themselves in the shoes of the average Jewish person that drives past their local Jewish school and sees armed officers standing outside and just think, how is this normal? How is this, something that the UK has to deal with? And for people that want to say whataboutisms, like, oh, what about Islamophobia, which is not really a thing, you just have to ask, how many Islamic schools have security posted out in front of them normally as routine? I mean, we can see it with our own eyes, and yet for some reason, we've just been tiptoeing around this issue. And to be honest, I just think of all the issues that the UK faces, this is another thing that we just don't need to add to. We do not need to add to this kind of sick cancer of hatred that's clearly targeting one group. But whenever we tell our politicians about it, we expect our politicians to act like adults. They're like, oh, what aboutism? What about anti-Muslim hostility? It's just like, get a grip. Look at things with what is happening before your very eyes.
Look at what is actually happening rather than what theoretically could happen. And
Exactly.
And Tom, what does it say about the state of Britain, about the state of discourse, about the state of the left, that the reaction of so many people online to this heinous attack was to say, well, it's probably a false flag. Israel probably did it. Maybe the Jews did it to themselves for some nefarious reason. I mean, it has been extraordinary that even like some quite prominent people have been, giving a nudge, nudge, wink, wink to that kind of conspiracy theorizing.
Yeah, not just on the left, of course. The online right has got into Jew hatred once again in a big way, and that's something which should really concern us. And you can't help but feel for British Jews at a time like this, because at precisely the time that they require that extra level of support, action, solidarity, action, as well as words, you're getting this denialism, you're getting this victim blaming, you're getting this refusal to accept that this is even really a problem, that this is just kind of misdirected anger about Gaza. I think when you see an ambulance or a string of ambulances run by a Jewish charity, which is for Jews and non-Jews alike, it's worth stressing, in the area, been running in that part of North London for many decades now, targeted for no other reason that they're Jewish. This was not, even if you wanted to dress this up as kind of, anti-Israel, it's the mask is well and truly slipped here, not just in terms of the kind of domestic anti-Semitism problem, but also the claims made on behalf of the Islamic Republic by its many apologists. I mean, just targeting and trying to menace and trying to intimidate just Jewish people in a country like Britain shows the really toxic heart of that entire ideology. And going back to Esther's point about the warped priorities at a time like this, we've been told basically since Brexit they're on the road to a new 1930s, that because 10 years ago now a majority of British voters quite politely asked for more border control and for control over their own laws, that was a kind of terrifying slippery slope to Nazism. The fact that over that time and before it as well, you had this rising ambient anti-Semitism. You would see stories come and go, but not generate that much discussion about Jewish cemeteries being desecrated, about synagogues being attacked. All of this burst out into the open after October the 7th. But, it was back in 2021 that we saw that convoy of cars driving around Finchley Road in northwest London with loudhailers blaring slogans like "kill the Jews" and "fuck their daughters." This is something that has not kind of stirred the concern of the anti-racist set whatsoever.
Yeah.
And you think, how many kind of echoes of history do you need? Jewish shops being smashed up, fire bombings at places of worship. Well, and yet this doesn't generate the kind of action that we need. And of course, worse, and as we talked about certainly on the podcast last week, the fact that the supposed anti-fascists and the supposed anti-racists are making excuses for those people, going on marches with the people who are committing it. And that's one of the things about the current time. There's this kind of grim division of labor between the kind of radical Islamic groups, whether they're backed by Iran or not, who are menacing, harming, some cases killing British Jews, and then the leftist side of the anti-Israel, pro-Palestine movement, which is harassing them in their places of work, is campaigning to stop Jewish MPs visiting schools, which is going around universities talking about putting the Zios in the ground and all the rest of it. That kind of pincer movement, which is going on at the moment, is really, really grotesque. And again, the lack of seriousness that seems to confront it. I mean, you get politicians will say a few nice things at a time like this, but action certainly always seems to escape them.
Yeah, so I mean, often these kind of incidents, no matter how serious they are, get pretty quickly forgotten. I mean, as Thomas says, politicians do come out strongly initially. Keir Starmer had some pretty strong words to say about it earlier this week, as did Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary. But it doesn't seem to generate anything like the visceral anger that, say, I don't know, Nick Timothy making a comment about an Islamic prayer does, for instance. This is an actual attack that could have easily killed people, and yet it doesn't generate the level of horror that nasty words might when used against another group.
Yeah, I mean, I think for people that really think anti-Semites can do no wrong, they always have a reason to sanitize brutal attacks against Jews. They'll say, oh, but Israel did this. Oh, but this. And it's just, you have to be quite warped to follow that train of thought when something happens like that. We see that even with sort of media outlets in the US, like CNN, after the foiled terror plot in New York. Where they describe those two men as just, two men, like two guys just going about their day, having a great time. It could have been a nice, warm, sunny day in New York. But then they just happened to turn up at Zohra Mamdani's house with bombs. I mean, it's just, who would have thunk it? And it's like they're trolling the public. Like, you cannot possibly be serious. You can't have trained journalists trying to sanitize basically evil by saying, oh, these are two promising young men who just happened to turn up to an anti-Islam protest with homemade bombs. And it's the same thing with the attack against the synagogue in Michigan. You're just seeing this trend of always trying to contextualize and sanitize attacks against Jews. And it's because there's this kind of unholy alliance between Western progressives and, quite frankly, men who hold them in contempt quite openly. I mean, these are people that could never go to parts of the world in the grips of Islamist governments or terrorists and, for example, be gay or be women or wear a skirt out at night or enjoy the kinds of freedoms that allow them to mouth off in the West, to mouth off their ignorance in the West. And yet somehow you've seen this kind of, unholy alliance, no pun intended, happening. And they're just only connected by their hatred of the West and in particular the US and Israel. And because of that deep found hatred, all of the seemingly progressive principles falls by the wayside. Who cares about women's rights or emancipation or LGBT rights or the patriarchy or any of that? Because the overarching principle fundamentally is hatred of the West and the US. And it's quite disheartening because you can see that in many ways they're being useful idiots. But they don't see it that way. I mean, I happen to remember, I don't know about you guys, but I happen to remember a time when the Greens were actually for the climate and for the environment. They actually used to campaign about making the world a greener, more environmentally friendly place. I can't remember any green policies regarding the environment in the last 2 years, and certainly not under Zach Polanski. Can you? I mean, all I hear is, down with Israel and the oppression of Muslims in the UK, who I think have a pretty good deal. I mean, they're parts of the Islamic world where, the kind of extreme Islam sects that we see in the UK certainly wouldn't flourish there. It wouldn't flourish in Saudi Arabia, and it certainly wouldn't flourish in UAE. A country, by the way, that has stopped sending its students to the UK because of the pull of radical Islam. So, I mean, this whole thing is coming full circle, and it's kind of horrifying to watch. But I think that the bigger question is, what can we actually do about it? And I think it's just being unapologetic about our disgust and our distaste for that, giving law enforcement some teeth. The PREVENT program is so woefully underfunded that they're just basically monitoring people and just watching, or kind of like a game of whack-a-mole, to see which lunatic is going to, get up the confidence to commit a horrific attack in public. That's basically what's happening.
A lot is changing in the world right now, but one thing that never ends is the fight for free speech. Whether you've noticed it or not, if you're in the UK, the internet you've been accessing has now been heavily censored thanks to the Online Safety Act. Thankfully, there's an effortless way you can get around the government diktats, thanks to our partners at Private Internet Access, or PIA for short. PIA is the VPN that I use and trust. In case you didn't know, a VPN, or virtual private network, is an app that hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. Whenever you're browsing online on an unprotected device, your device is transmitting a lot of information out into the open, which can be seen by multiple parties before it reaches the website you're trying to visit. Instead of giving away your personal information and location to the world, PIA lets you change your IP address to one of 91 countries. This means you can gain access to websites and services that are only available in those locations. And it's not just that. Did you know that streaming services like Netflix and Prime Video have huge catalogues of content, but you can only access a fraction of it from your own country? Using PIA to change your location opens up a whole new world of streaming. I love it. Paying for Netflix without using PIA is a bit like paying for front row seats at the cinema, but being forced to sit in the hallway. I also use it all the time when I'm traveling to catch up with what's going on at home. Because PIA is available for all platforms, I never need to worry about my safety or privacy. It works on Windows, Apple Macs, iPhones, Androids, and more. Even better, you only need one subscription to protect yourself across all of the devices you own. So, sign up now to the world's most transparent VPN provider and take advantage of our special offer. Viewers of our show can get 86% off a subscription to Private Internet Access, so that's just £1.67 a month. And you also get an extra 4 months thrown in completely for free. So, to take advantage of this incredible deal, just go to piavpn.com/spiked. That's piavpn.com/spiked. Signing up is totally risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support. You won't regret it. Sign up now at piavpn.com/spiked. Speaking of, some of those Muslim countries, we should talk a bit about Tucker Carlson, the US podcast host, former Fox News anchor, who has come out in favor of Sharia law. I mean, he was talking about Saudi Arabia, some of the Gulf states, and saying that he thinks that they are free, that they are very recognizing of difference, very welcoming and tolerant, thanks to their underpinning of Sharia law.
When people are self-confident, when they're really pleased with what they're doing and they believe that their system is the right system, that self-confidence results in a kind of welcoming attitude.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll be sitting at dinner in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and you'll say, I'm really kind of pro-Jesus, like I'm a Christian. They'll be like, oh, that's so great.
And they don't have the same.
Well, they mean it.
And they don't have the same belief.
No, they're
in some
Muslims.
cases. They're Muslims.
It's a country governed by Sharia law.
Right.
And they're like, that's great.
I mean, Tom, what do you make of that? I mean, it seems just a complete inversion of the truth. And, we talk a lot about this sort of Islamo-left alliance, but we're certainly starting to see more people on the crankish end of the right dip their toe into this stuff.
It's interesting trying to follow the train of thought such that it exists, these comments which seem to have been made in an address in Saudi Arabia itself, as well as on a podcast more recently, where he seems to be kind of getting at, first of all, the idea that the West and America are in a state of utter sort of degeneracy. So to contrast the kind of clean streets and idyllic surrounds of a place like Qatar or a place like Saudi Arabia, with New York City, where, in his words, you'll see, shit on the street and people having sex in ATM vestibules. And And then, but then kind of following this on to suggest that because these nations are much more self-confident in who they are, they know where they're from and where they're going, as it were, that they're therefore much more tolerant. It's also, not only is it kind of safer because they're so authoritarian, but also that it's in a sense more open. And he talks about, being at a sort of dinner party in Saudi Arabia and being able to say, I'm actually very pro Jesus, and them say that's wonderful, completely ignoring the fact that in Saudi Arabia you can be pretty heavily punished if you are proselytizing on behalf of Christianity. You can be pretty heavily punished for breaching all kinds of strictures under Sharia law. So it's you could call it contrarianism if you're being charitable, but I think this comes from a pretty deep well of sort of it's almost like the right wing's mirror image of kind of leftist Western self-loathing to a certain extent, in the same way that you had kind of from the 60s onwards, a lot of left-wing movements and intellectuals would see kind of Western modernity as quite kind of hollow and meaningless, and they found kind of authenticity and substance in these sort of exotic Eastern cultures, which might have their problems, but at least they know what they are. I think we're kind of seeing a similar thing on the more kind of traditional right-wing end of politics, which is so kind of affronted by the state of Western culture that it is almost seeing a kind of positive contrast to some of the most authoritarian, intolerant and unfree countries imaginable. But it's a journey that Tucker Carlson certainly has been on for some time now, it seems.
That's true. It's the absurd end of a journey he began a long time ago. Esther, what do you think? Saudi Arabia, wonderful, free, liberal, tolerant country.
Well, I mean, Tucker obviously has the views that he has, because when he goes to countries like Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, he lives in luxury. He enjoys all the things that many of us Westerners, when we go to that part of the world, enjoy. He's not a Pakistani or Bangladeshi worker working sort of 18 hours in the blistering heat, or facing labor laws that basically is akin to like modern day slavery. There have been stories of these individuals having their passports seized when they enter the country, being abused by their employers. I mean, the proportion of immigrant labor to the actual local workforce is so great that it's about 2-to-1 in places like Saudi Arabia. So he's clearly speaking of from a position of privilege, which he doesn't recognize because, of course, he is Tucker Carlson, and in his mind, he has principles. But look, Tucker Carlson, whenever I see a headline with something that he says, it kind of reminds me of when I was a kid. I lived near a zoo when I was a kid, and I was always so fascinated by the monkeys in the enclosures, because they just used to scratch their asses and like examine whatever kind of debris they managed to come off their asses. And I feel like that's what Tucker Carlson is like. Like, he ruminates in his mind to a degree of ignorance that is almost baffling. But to him, it's like, oh my gosh, I have discovered the answers to the universe wedged between my ass cheeks. And that's not to say that he's not articulate or intelligent. He knows exactly what he's doing. But to me, it's kind of like having a diet of cow dung. You can technically do it, but it's of no value. I don't mind listening to people that I disagree with. I actually think it's great. It's important to stress test your ideas, but I don't see anything of value that has ever come out of Tucker Carlson's mouth, especially in the last few years. This is someone who has no convictions to speak of. And I don't respect it. I would much more, and I do much more readily, read The Guardian and read, left-wing columnists and listen to what they have to say than something that Tucker Carlson says, because this is someone who has no principles. He clearly doesn't understand what he's talking about. And I say this is someone who actually enjoys going to the Middle East. I appreciate it, but I'm also very aware that I am a woman, and that, for example, my experiences traveling to certain parts of the world, like Pakistan, for example, has been made much, much easier because I go with a man. And there's a certain degree of protection that gives me in those kinds of societies. Now, that would be unimaginable, unthinkable in places like the UK and the US, who happen to be modern democracies, which surprisingly, the only actual democracy in the Middle East is Israel. So go figure. So yeah, I don't think he has anything really of value to speak on really very much. And that's not to say that he's dumb, but I'm not surprised something like this will come out of his mouth, because he's not a woman that's lived under Sharia law. He certainly wouldn't send his daughters to live in a country with Sharia law where they could be stoned for perceived infidelity or for not behaving in a certain way. And so, yeah, I'm not trying to slander him, but I don't think he has very much of value for me to absorb or listen to. And his ideas are akin to, literally watching a monkey scratch his ass and be fascinated by what they can scrape from the depths of their bum cheeks.
I'm just fascinated by the way people like him just completely dive into these ideas with with both feet, whether it's on he starts questioning the narrative around the Second World War. And it's one thing to critique what you see as the establishment history or whatever, but then he just dives into complete alternative fanciful history where maybe
he
Churchill
already
was
said
the bad
about
guy.
Oswald Mosley.
Yeah, he's just
He
bringing
was,
up Oswald
he said that
Mosley.
he was the leader of the opposition, and I'm like, what history book did you steal from hell?
Yeah.
He was not the leader of the opposition. Like, what are you talking about? And the thing is, I watch him with fascination, again, like I would a monkey in a zoo, because I just think this is why I'm not rich, because I lack the audacity to lie so brazenly and to feign my ignorance as some sort of expertise. And then, like some sort of Houdini act, just say, but I'm just asking questions. That is why I'm not rich, gentlemen. This is why I am poor, because I have shame. But if you want to be rich, then you can also just do away with any shame that you were born with and just follow Tucker Carlson and just spew out whatever conspiracy theories that you plug into ChatGPT and have spew out.
And he is very good at playing dumb, isn't he? So he does that kind of, really harsh. Maybe Sharia is better than Western democratic law.
Yeah, the kind of credulousness is fascinating, whether it's this issue or any other. When he went to speak with the Tate brothers in their Romanian compound and just completely uncritically accepted their version of events in relation to the very serious charges, it was like, you're blowing my mind when you say. So there's an element where he's quite a unique individual in that respect, where this kind of newfound kind of Islamophilia seems to, or Gulf state philia, maybe more specifically, which seems to be generated. There's all kinds of speculation about, his funding sources and so on. But I think beyond that, there's also a kind of sense of the way in which he thinks, which is obviously in many respects quite conspiratorial. I mean, this, interested in 9/11, truthorism and all the rest of it. This idea that you've been lied to. And I think particularly in the context of his growing opposition to Israel and growing up and long-standing now opposition to kind of neoconservative politics and whatnot, he seems to have latched onto that in relation to the question of pretty hardline Islamic regimes as well. Like the powers that be want me to hate them, but I'm a free-thinking individual who is so open-minded you could see past all of the lashes and the throwing gay people off of buildings in order to see the actually even more free heart of this place. I think that's the thing which is fascinating, the kind of crossover again with existing trends in on the left, which is rather than kind of recognizing that there are problems with Western countries, whether it's not living up to our ideals in relation to freedom, whether it's being slightly detached from a sense of history and tradition, or some sort of national story or identity or whatever, rather than just looking at that on its own terms, there's this desire to say, if anything, we're more unmoored, we're more we're even more authoritarian than these explicitly and purposely medieval in many respects states. So again, I think it's that heady mix of sort of a new right-wing form of Western self-loathing, if you like, married with conspiracy theorizing, and that's where you end up with someone like Tucker Carlson, I suppose.
So let's talk about the Together Alliance's next march against the far right. It's happening on Sunday in London. We've spoken about the Together Alliance before, a bit of a ragtag coalition of various, trade union groups, anti-racist groups. Lots of celebrities endorsed it. Some of our favourites, like Paloma Faith and Kneecap.
Yeah.
And
some of the great thinkers of our time.
Napalm Death signed the
those famous peace sticks. Napalm Death. Yes.
Corner Shop. Do you remember them from that Brimful of Asher song from years ago? Esther, as ever, they don't say this explicitly, but you know what they really mean when they say far right. They don't mean the men setting fire to Jewish ambulances and attacking synagogues. They, of course, mean the real far right, aka Reform UK, the most popular party in the country. I mean, what's your take on this? I mean, these things are just so predictable. Seems like they're, again, just picking the wrong target.
I mean, I've seen the lineup, and I can only describe them as sort of like the Brady Bunch from Transylvania. Just this kind of weird mix of eclectic individuals who many of them could do with a good shower. Anyway, but look, I think like much of the actual far right, these group of, I would say probably far left, because I of all the leftists I've met, I don't really kind of categorize these people with them, because I think a lot of leftists actually think about their ideas and then they can articulate them in a coherent way. I think they actually put a lot of thought into their own personal and political philosophies, as opposed to celebrities that are quite reactionary. And I've never, the test of a celebrity that has actually thought about it or their political views is when they're willing to say something that could actually risk their reputation within the narrow field that they work in. All of these celebrities say, I'm not afraid to speak on this. Yeah, you're probably going to get like some business from that actually, because you are in a milieu of people who all think the same. But anyway, that being said, I would advise these people to get out more, to probably take a holiday to Ibiza. Many of them can afford it, because what they have fallen prey to is the illness that many on the far right have fallen prey to as well, which is too much time on the internet. Because these people happen to think that what they see on Twitter, which I think is a cesspit. I don't really enjoy Twitter. I don't know what's happened since Elon Musk took over, but all I get are like a bunch of like Asian porn girls trying to sell me pictures of their boobs. And I'm like, sis, I could just look down if I want to see a picture of some breasts. But anyway, I don't think being online for extended periods of time allows you to get a real cross-section of what society is actually like. And I think what's happened is these people have kind of imbibed a lot of the hype that they see on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok especially, and think that the country is in a state where we're about to basically elect a bunch of Oswald Mosleys. There are real problems in this country, and there have been many attempts by people across the political spectrum to actually highlight the things that are bothering people and the reasons for them. You know, I went to Sunderland, I went to Newcastle, I went to Peterborough, I went to Boston, I went to, all sorts of parts of the country. And I didn't really see people that have concerns or might even be friendly towards reform as, oh, these are horrible right-wing people that are trying to kill all the blacks and the gays or whatever. They just have concerns about this country and have come to different conclusions about how to rescue it. I mean, I saw like old grannies from Liverpool in their 70s and 80s talking about voting reform, because for them, immigration is a very big issue. Now, if you ask me critically what my view is about whether reform or whatever, what's the best political vehicle to solve these problems, I think it's a bit more nuanced. But these people have whipped themselves into a frenzy and are now going onto the streets to disturb our peace, because they are expressing something that they have taken in from a narrow bubble, amongst a narrow group of people and from a narrow bubble online. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's healthy on the left, and I don't think that's healthy on the right. I think in everything, you should stress test your own ideas. I mean, you should have your own convictions and beliefs, but also stress test them. Speak to people from all walks of life, and kind of try and understand why people are saying the things that they are. I mean, when people say like, oh, the NHS is stressed because there are too many people, well, they're not saying that immigrants go to hell. It's just a basic of supply and demand, right? If you have too much demand for not enough supply, you're going to have to ration things, and things are going to get a poorer quality for the native population. It's just a fact. But these are people that I think, as far as I'm concerned, have never really demonstrated any degree of critical thinking. Certainly not Paloma Faith, who also happens to have a mansion in California, so I'm sure that helps. So yeah, I think these people need to get out more.
Yeah, and also, I mean, Tom, it's fascinating that in the sort of mindset of many of the people who would be on the march, wanting some sort of immigration control is far right, voting reform is far right, but saying up Hamas, up Hezbollah, essentially, giving succor to anti-Semitic terrorist organizations, that's fine. You can be on this anti-racist march.
No, exactly. And of course, you're referring to NECAP there, who were obviously signatories to this original statement they put out. Also, I'm sure will be involved in some way, shape or form if they're back from Cuba. In time on this demonstration over the weekend, this is the thing. I mean, you feel like you're repeating yourself all of the time. But if Nigel Farage or anyone in and around reform had ever done anything close to appearing on stage as NECAP did, waving the flags and shouting the slogans of anti-Semitic terror armies, if you could even think of what the kind of parallel would possibly be on the reform side of the equation, they rightly would be hauled over the coals for it, and rightly would be nowhere electorally. And I think that's what's so fascinating about how explicit all of this is now. I mean, in that statement this group first came out with, they said for the first time in British history, a far-right party is topping the polls, by which they mean reform. They didn't name them explicitly, possibly because they had a lawyer go over it first. But this is also part of a development we've touched on already, but has become very clear over the past decade, which is that supposed anti-racism and anti-fascism is basically now just a cover for kind of anti-majoritarianism, for anti-democracy. The supposed cordon sanitaire these people want to erect around certain parties which are supposedly beyond the pale are not fascist or far-right ones, or they're the ones that reflect essentially the majority view of the nation.
Yeah.
This has just become a kind of a garb in which elitists and snobs and anti-democrats and a lot of kind of crankier elements, even to the left of that, are dressing up their hatred of ordinary people. The fact that this is so gleefully done, the fact that some of the worst periods in history are kind of evoked, in order to justify this campaign makes it even more sickening. I mean, if you're throwing around, just because we've got used to people calling everyone to the right of Keir Starmer a fascist or far right, doesn't make it any more despicable, not only to the millions of voters who simply want essentially a kind of immigration settlement that we had pre-1997, but also to historical memory, to the victims of fascism. The fact that this just has become these words and these labels have just become a sort of plaything of cultural elites throwing a tantrum. It's become the stuff of life, but that doesn't make it any less despicable, I should say.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Esther. But that is not all of our conversation. If you're a Spike supporter, you can join us over on Spike Podcast Unlocked. If you're not a Spike supporter, then why not join us today? For just £5 a month, you can get unlimited access to Spiked, access to Spike Podcast Unlocked and other bonus content. And also, as Tom mentioned earlier, you can get extra special discounts to our events, including the Spike Summit, which is coming up on Saturday, the 27th of June. So sign up now at spike-online.com/support. See you over on Spike Podcast Unlocked. Thanks again to PIA for sponsoring this episode. Take control of your digital life and get PIA for 86% off. Click the link in the description below or scan the QR code to find out more. Thank you so much for watching the Spike podcast. We'll be back next week, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the Spike podcast, then why not check out what else our channel has to offer, from our documentaries to our weekly interviews and podcasts like The Brendan O'Neill Show. And if you're a Spike supporter, you can watch the second half of this episode by logging in on the Spiked website. If you're not yet a Spike supporter, then why not sign up now? You'll get unlimited access to the website, ad-free reading, discounted tickets to our events, and so much more. So become a Spike supporter today by going to spiked-online.com/support. That's spiked-online.com/support.